Hi everyone. So before we begin, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country, as it's what we usually do now in social work, and it's something that I value personally and would like to contribute to. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today. We are conducting this interview today on Tasmanian Aboriginal land. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and future, and pay my respects to elders who could not attain the status of elderhood because of colonisation. I personally aligned with the agenda of sovereignty of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia, and I acknowledge the myth of Terra Nullius. So we're continuing our journey of exploring what social work practice looks like under the lens of sustainability and innovation. And with us today we have Al, who's going to share with us his experiences in a very unique program that took place for many years here in Tasmania. It's another example of innovative and sustainable practice that you can learn from. So in exploring what meso practice is for social work, we have an example of practice here today. We're going to be talking with Al about the project that he was involved with for years. Where a project can be positioned at the intersection of institutions and the community, at the intersections of policy, the government and the community, and what happens in those spaces when we try to innovate and are aiming for sustainability. So rather than introduce you fully, Al, why don't you introduce yourself to our students?
Thanks, Joss. Yeah, my name's Al Adams. I've been involved in the outdoors all my life, but it was in 1994 that I began working with a program called Project Hahn here in Tasmania, based in Hobart. It was started in 1983 by Tasmanian school teachers, educators who wanted to develop a program that was different for the needs of students that weren't being addressed by mainstream education system. So I just got interested in this program because I had a background in recreational activities such as climbing and abseiling, and I sort of followed that up with a bit of instructional work. And I got interested in this program, I guess, around in the early 90s, and I could see that perhaps my own experiences had a lot to do with what I'd grown and developed through my contact with outdoor activities. And I thought, yeah, I'd like to just have a look at this program. Mm-hmm. The program itself, when I began, was very small. It was running around about 100 or so people through every year, so pretty small. And yeah, by the time I finished in 2013, it was significantly larger, and a lot of change had occurred. Mm-hmm. So yeah, my involvement was almost over a 20-year period.
Wow. And what was the program about, Al, as it started to develop in those early days right through to the end?
Well, it was based on the philosophies of Kurt Hahn, a German educationist who moved from Germany to the UK in the 1930s. He was forced to leave Germany. And he set up a number of schools. He was really keen to build schools that challenged people experientially. So instead of just having kids engaged on one level, intellectual, cognitive, sitting there in a classroom, being engaged, he felt that there was a need to engage them emotionally and at a level of some sort of activity. So the basis of experiential learning or experiential education is Kurt Hahn's basic premise on how we need to direct development at young people, particularly adolescents. We have a duty, he felt, that to impel them into some sort of experience that would form values. Two things came out of that. I think any program: risk and resilience. And they're kind of things that risk gets such a bad rap in modern contemporary culture, but resilience is a real buzzword, I would say, in social work and psychology right now, and we would think potentially that it was quite a new concept. But no, it's something that's been worked on. Kurt Hahn probably went on to develop a program called Outward Bound in the 1940s, upon direction by the UK military to help seamen survive lifeboat, or their boats being torpedoed in the North Atlantic. And the government and the bureaucracy were discovering that in those survival situations, it was just the older seamen that were surviving, not the younger, more physically able. They were just dying. There was obviously clearly some difference in their psychological makeup, and so Hahn was given the job to create a program to start to look at developing resilience. And out of that came the Outward Bound movement, which now I think is it's got schools in over 30 countries around the world, and thousands of people attend these courses every year. But that is really what the philosophical underpinnings of Project Hahn, that's where they originated from.
Yeah.
So just to give you a little background on that.
Yeah. So that was what informed how what you developed and what your focus was, I guess.
Yeah. These Tasmanian educators could see that, people would really, the activities were just the medium. They weren't the end point. It wasn't outdoor recreation. It was simply a means to provide some catalyst for change, development, and those two important characteristics, resilience and risk, were really key to it. To build resilience, we need experience, and risk is one way we need to do it. And development and growth is highly dependent on us taking risks.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, and in any of the major psychological theories, we see that very thing coming up. But it's something that, as Western cultures got more and more complex, risk has been looked on as something that's quite a negative trait as we try to keep our children very safe and away from any harm. When perhaps the opposite might be something that we need to do.
That's right. So how did it become then a project that was about working with disadvantaged youth through the school system, I guess, and taking them out to camps out bush for 8-10 days? Was it always from the beginning that, or did it evolve into the camps?
Yeah, that's a good question. The original impetus was to deal with students in schools, and that grew to a wider section in the community. Very early on, we discovered that homogeneity in groups was not a very helpful approach, that we needed to actually have diverse groups. The outcomes were much better in terms of personal growth for the individuals, and the group goals were always met in a much higher level. So it grew to taking people from referrals from Health and Human Services, from Youth Justice. It grew to taking young offenders from adult corrections. It grew to referrals from a range of areas, including the Aboriginal community, mental health services, and probably more recently alcohol and other drug agencies, particularly clients in rehab. So we sort of developed different populations came on board throughout that period.
Right. So you would work with a range of referral points that would have a range of different kids with different contexts.
And we try to mix them up.
You try to mix them up.
Yeah, I mean, group selection was really key. Yeah, it was one thing we had control over. So doing our homework and getting referral information about individuals in the beginning was really important, to whether or not we would include that person. The outcomes would depend on the greater the diversity, the richer the group, the richer the outcomes. It just seemed to be that. That formula seemed to be something that worked for us for most of the time.
So that was the formation of the groups to go out on camps. How did you guys build your connections with the institutions that were making the referrals, and indeed for the word to get out about what you guys were doing?
Was it such a long period of time? It was a 30-year program, so some of those, it was quite interesting to note that we worked with schools at the beginning, we worked with schools at the very end. And one of the first schools we ever worked with was across the river at Rose Bay. And Rose Bay High School was one of our, I guess, big referrals when I first started. And at the very last, I think they were the second last program that was delivered was specifically for that school. So that's just there was a ability for the successes of the program just to percolate through the education system. And the same happened with the other client groups that we work with. It spoke for themselves. Referral sources would say to us, social workers and psychologists would say, I don't understand how you know so much about this person in such a short time. What's happening? In 5 days or 6 days that you've had this person on this program, you've written this report, and I have been seeing this person for 18 months and I have no idea about any of this.
So tell us what happened. How did you get to know these young people so much out in the bush?
Well, it's pretty hard to spend 5 or 6 days 24/7 with somebody and not let something out about yourself. It's pretty hard to protect. And as the group coalesces and it's safe and there's a strong sense of belonging in the group. I belong here. This is part of my group. And then the functioning of the group as they tackle successive challenges, they rely on each other. So the degree of integrity and honesty just grows with that. And so people start to work on personal issues. And it's just a natural kind of progression in that very beginning stage where everybody's sitting in the back of the vehicle, nobody's looking at each other, there's space between people. And that to the end where people are saying, goodness me, it's roomy in the back of this vehicle, isn't it? Because everybody's so comfortable with one another. Yeah. So, in 5 or 6 days, there can be the transformation is a real honour to see. Yes. It's evident. Body language rise without anybody even saying a word. Yeah.
So I want to ask you about 2 components of your work. One would be, what was the role of nature in the processes that allowed young people to open up and get to know each other in that way? Yeah. And the people that worked with the young people, who were they? Where did they come from? What was their training? What was their passion that brought you guys together to do this work so successfully for so long?
The role of nature, it's never to be underestimated. A small human in a large landscape. For me, throughout my own personal journey through the outdoors, I find that paradox between being small is not about being insignificant. It's actually very meaningful. You know that nature's more powerful than you when you're out there. And you do have to have yourself organised. Honestly, you do have to have things sorted. And the role of nature to help you sort that out is very clear. If you don't put your raincoat on, you get wet. If you don't stick your tent up in time, all the stuff you got lying around on the ground is going to get satched. If you don't get it in the tent, the possums will eat the food. Just simple things like that. There is a real behaviourist approach. There's some natural consequences that are reinforced. So if you make the right decisions, fab. If you make the wrong decisions, you get sort of consequences that you kind of have to think about. So, some really, it's not nature punishing you, it's just nature reminding you about perhaps being more thoughtful and careful. So, there's some real energy around nature in providing feedback. And it's immediate. You make the wrong choice and you get immediate feedback. Where does that happen in our society? Yes. Never. But it's if you get up late and you mess around and you don't get walking until midday, you're walking in the dark, and it's a real pain walking in the dark. Honestly, those kind of things. It's not just a pain; it's actually you suffer, and so there's some real clear reasons why you might get up the next morning and go, shit, I'm not going to muck around until midday. We might just get ourselves on the road by 9:30. Could we do that? Because I don't want to walk in the dark again. It's just horrible.
And you guys didn't facilitate in ways that was dictatorial. You didn't tell the kids, okay, guys,
don't tell them
to get up. No, it wasn't any of that.
No, it's very non-directive. It's learning through experience. It's the Kurt Hahn kind of approach. We'll offer the experience. we'll manage the risk in the background, but a lot of risk that they discover is really perceived risk. It's not actually real risk sometimes, but it does the same thing. It provides the same responses. So we can work a lot with that perceived risk and let it run quite a lot. When there's real risk, yes, we do need to intervene. Yeah, but that's something as facilitators, we have to monitor all the time. Now you asked about the people who are on the program, who actually facilitate the program outcomes. They're an extraordinary group of people. Up until 2013, we had 12 casual operatives, and their skills ranged from people with really strong outdoor credentials, instructors across a range of disciplines, from caving to kayaking to rock climbing to bushwalking and navigation. And then we had other staff that had academic qualifications in aligned fields, social work, psychology, counselling, and there was always a deficit, I think, in the area of what we call soft skills that we would have to do training for. So we run our own in-house training to begin with, and that prospective staff members would be part of. So the Facilitating Wilderness Therapy course that we ran about 30 of those, I think, in the time that I was employed with the program, and they just gave a lot of background theory and also practical implementation of those theories throughout that program. So there was a real emphasis on ensuring that our staff were trained, and beyond that, we would pick particular issues that we were maybe struggling with as with clients, and we would deliver, drop in specialist sessions of training around those particular areas of deficit that we'd identify. We would go to external people to provide it. Sometimes we'd do an in-house one. It would depend on the nature of it.
So the skilling up was really important.
It was paramount. It was paramount, for sure. And we would debrief every program as it came back, and often people are pretty bruised from a week away. It's fairly intense, as you can imagine.
I think one of the things that fascinated me about the work that you guys did was also the way that, because you were at the crisscross of institutions, government, non-government agencies, and the community, the way that you just described what you did with the kids out in the bush and the people involved doing that work, but the way that you had to work with these institutions and with these government agencies and non-government agencies to convince them that this was a worthwhile activity for kids. And I guess you leaned on the relationships you had with the majority of the stakeholders, but as neoliberalism started to arrive strongly in Tasmania and filter through to the welfare state, what was that like for you guys?
I guess it started with John Howard's I guess his shift in emphasis of dealing with people who were unemployed, because this state had particularly high unemployment when I started working in the program in the 1990s. I think we're up around about 35% youth unemployment across the state. Pretty horrendous for young people who were contemplating leaving school and starting out in life. And during that process, I think we lost a massive referral in the Commonwealth Employment Service, and there was a slimline job network that replaced that. So we lost a cohort of 16 and 17-year-olds because we had relied on the Commonwealth Employment Service to provide us with those clients. We never found anything really to replace that, because kids had to do either work for the dole or go on to higher education or find something to do that would meet the obligations of their JobNet provider, which were underfunded and very difficult to provide any additional funding to, say, do a Project Tarn course. So those things were quite difficult. I think ultimately it led to the demise of the program. I think the shift in government emphasis on risk taking. Personally, at the head of our organisation, Sport and Recreation, when I started, there was somebody in the directorship role who was a teacher. He was a footballer as well, and initially I thought that was kind of. I thought that, oh yeah, look, there's real sport emphasis here. This is not really about what we can do for people that are, you know, maybe struggling. But over time, what really grew on me was the fact that I was seeing more and more of this teacher side. And yeah, he gave us a great degree of latitude. And he said, look, I'm responsible to minister. If something extraordinarily bad happens on a program, I want to know before the minister tells me. So you need to keep that line of communication open. He said, look, I'm here to support you. Yeah, I know the program is dealing with people and you're going to go to some places at times that might, you know, be very dark and very difficult to manage. But he said, because you're dealing with very tricky human beings in what you do. But I really support that. But just keep me posted. Yeah, I want to hear from you before I hear from the minister. Because he said, I can't defend you if I hear it secondhand. So that was a really liberating approach for a senior executive person in government to say. But that changed. And when that changed, I think that was kind of a bit of the beginning of the end. Also, the governance structure that we didn't quite have right of the organisation, and we had a memorandum of understanding between an incorporated body and the government agency, Sport and Recreation.
So you're in the middle of that.
Yeah, and we managed that for about 6 or 7 years really well, but the incorporated side of the management structure decided to start other business units off it, and that really compromised things to some degree. It put us at risk, and eventually at threat of bankruptcy, some of those particularly business areas meant that we had to withdraw from that arrangement and go back to be solely focused under the management of a government agency. So that meant that we had more questions to answer, more deliverables to be measured on, and for the bigger part of that, I think the measurables were entirely participation related. They weren't actually therapeutic outcomes. They were all just numbers, quantitative, not qualitative.
And up until that point, how do you learn how to collect that kind of evidence to sort of show people the benefit of participating in these programs?
Oh, look.
Or is that when it really ramped up and you had to learn to show the numbers and the outputs in that way?
This program's really well researched. Yeah, it's you might have seen some of the research. There's over 20 papers published in national and international journals. There's been 3 major research projects through it. It wouldn't have mattered had there been twice that much.
Yeah. So the evidence was there.
They weren't looking.
Yes.
They weren't looking. They were not. They were not that interested. It would appear. You know, that's what I got. I remember showing one of my Sport and Rec colleagues a copy of a thesis, and I said, just read the executive summary, don't go through it. It was a PhD thesis into the program looking at rehab clients and the effect of quiet time. And it was... I had to ask for the thesis back, and I never saw any articles ever written on it. There was sort of like, oh, this is just too much. We were too different. Yeah. We were too different.
And that was part of the issue for a neoliberal perspective.
Yeah, I went searching when you asked me that question earlier via email, you know, what caused the end of the program. And the official line in correspondence that essentially it was due to budgetary savings that Sport and Recreation needed to make at that time in 2014. Yeah, and the reason given is that the work of Project Harm, the Wilderness Program, was not sport and recreation's core business. So that's the official line. Despite being well published and robust evidence to build up the efficacy of the program, in the end, there's no escaping the rationalists' knife in times of fiscal restraint. The unofficial line, of course, is that Western governments are increasingly risk averse, and this program wasn't considered something they particularly wanted to manage, where you're dealing with people who might come up with some behaviour that would end up in the media.
Yeah. So the risks were basically the physical risks, right? Risk of falling off a cliff or losing one of them or the behaviour that could lead to fights or that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Let's say somebody got assaulted on a course or something like that, or it gets in the media. That's
that
really
was the concern.
Yeah, that's the concerns with programs. It's kind of these dark places in the bush where things go wrong. You shouldn't be there. That's it, and we shouldn't be having to deal with it, the fallout of it.
So to wrap up, let's share with the students, what is it that Tasmania is missing now as a result of this program being shut down? What are we missing?
What have we lost?
What have we lost?
What have we lost? Well, we lost an opportunity to give young people, just a way to connect to a bigger world. The wilderness environment is a great spot to go to heal. Indigenous cultures know that intuitively. Western cultures, not sure. So we've lost that chance of using this medium, which Tasmania has in abundance, as an innovative and unusual way to treat, just normal issues that young people and older people face as they grow and develop. I always think participants on programs have the best things to say, and talking about minimal impact bushwalking. Do you know what minimal impact bushwalking is?
I don't.
No, it's a kind of a code that bushwalkers use, not to look after the environment.
Okay.
In Tasmania, Pete Saws, you walk on the track. When it gets muddy, you keep walking on the track and you keep the damage to a minimum. So you walk through the mud.
Right.
Anyway, this is something we sometimes talk about on programs, the track's muddy, you don't walk around the edges, go through the middle, just suck it up. Because we're looking after the land.
Yeah.
And on this particular course that I went on in 2000, a young lady, a 15-year-old participant, wrote this. I said to the assistant debrief, she said, in order to get through the mud, you have to tread in it. In life, you can't avoid it, because wherever you step, there's going to be crap. So I kind of like that. There's a metaphor there.
Yes, indeed.
There's a fabulous metaphor. She was struggling with things in her life that were outside her control, and she was dealing with it. And this is just sort of kind of this minimal impact bushwalking code she could relate to directly. So that's something that I just thought might work.
Wonderful. Very powerful.
This one here is more from, it's just a bit of prose really, from a client in 1995, just around the time I started working with Project Hunt. He was an older guy. He would have probably admitted to using a lot of marijuana to keep his head fairly straight, but he was obviously very creative. As the mountains moved, we followed, keeping them company. The old man spoke to me with his woody words and his ferny breath, caressed me tenderly. For 3 days we walked and conversed freely. He tucked me in at night time, said good morning when I awoke. He showed me things of interest. I watched, I listened, I learned. When I left, I said goodbye. He was not there. The bush had moved on. I understand now. Yeah, I thought that was fabulous. Yeah, something he wrote in our logbook, and we never noticed it until we got back from the course.
I think that's a wonderful place to leave our conversation. Speaks for itself, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
Thank you very much, Al, for your time, for your effort in preparing for this interview, and for sharing with us
Thank you.
what Project Harm, what the Wilderness Program was all about. And I think for us as social workers in the making and social workers altogether, we have a lot to think about when we hear of a project like this, being born, living for, how many years did it go for?
30 years.
30 years.
31, almost, yeah.
Almost 31 years, and then losing it to neoliberalism. What can we do to recapture the magic of the Wilderness Program? I leave you with that question. Thanks, Al.
Cheers.